Hi, Naomi. So I have to ask you, how have you found Australia?
Being in Australia is always this experience of extremes, right? Because the extractive policies of your government, are some of the most extreme in the world, and it's just kind of hard to believe the defiance of the Australian government, of the Queensland government, in pushing these massive coal projects in the midst of some of the most extreme environmental climate impacts in the world, right? Including the bleaching of the Great Barrier Reef. But at the same time, Australia is, I think probably because you're up against this kind of adversity, has some of the most incredible activists in the world, and that's who I spend my time with when I'm not arguing with the IPA on television. And so I've been incredibly inspired by particularly the young activists, young Indigenous activists who are taking on the government and the coal companies and the gas companies and the pipeline companies, and with such clarity, with such wisdom beyond their years.
You've been up to the reef with your family and you've seen with your own eyes. Do you think the Australian government is being straight with the Australian people about the Great Barrier Reef?
Oh no. No, I mean, there's this really weird feeling up there where, you can almost imagine down the road this whole sort of tourist industry being like, a fossil itself, I sort of squint and can imagine the dive shops, covered in cobwebs. We had this experience in Bolivia where we went up one of the glaciers that has already disappeared. It used to be a ski hill. And they still have the old chairlifts, and they still have, all of this infrastructure for skiing, but there's no snow, and there hasn't been for years. And so I found myself thinking about that when I was there. But at the same time, the tour operators, many of the big tour operators are pretending everything is fine. We went out with some fantastic marine biologists from the Great Barrier Reef Legacy Project, and they're telling the truth, which is that it's really bad. All is not lost, but it's really bad, and we need to act like this is an emergency. But then you have some of the major tour operators, and we went out with some of them also to see what would happen. They didn't even mention the bleaching. They just take you to like a patch of healthy coral, and it's clear that they've been told to shut up. And it reminded me, actually, there's a great website here in Australia that collects letters of climate scientists, handwritten letters talking about how they feel, which is not something we ask climate scientists enough. And there's an amazing letter on that site from a climate scientist, I think in Germany, who says that he has this recurring dream of seeing a house on fire, and he's trying to raise the alarm and call the fire brigade, but there's some crazy person insisting that it's not happening, that it's a hoax, and keeps interfering with him calling. And so that's what it felt like. Like, it's bad enough that the fire is happening, but the fact that there are people interfering with the alarm and spreading misinformation, actively spreading misinformation that everything is fine, so that the world's biggest coal mine can be dug in Queensland, or the world's biggest new coal mine can be built in Queensland, and a new port, and with all the dredging and disruption that goes with it, not at all far from the Great Barrier Reef, just feels pretty insane.
Yes. Well, look, I know you've got to go and rewrite parts of your speech, so just finally, I wonder if you have a brief message for the more than 500,000 people who are part of the Greenpeace part of the movement in Australia.
Well, just that I'm so grateful for the work that you're all doing to protect this beautiful country, and to cherish what so deserves to be cherished, to support frontline movements, particularly Indigenous movements, so that they can have the resources that they need to protect their territory. And despite these incredibly difficult circumstances of being up against, governments that claim coal is good for humanity, and deny that the reef is bleaching, in the middle of this emergency, you're still capable of winning. I mean, you won against BP, which is pretty big, BP offshore drilling. So it shows that movement power, even in these very difficult situations, can win. I think the task for all of us in the climate movement in Australia and around the world is to do more to build a more diverse movement, to build a movement that looks like our countries. You know, Australia is such a diverse country, ethnically, culturally, linguistically. But you know, so many of its elite institutions don't represent that at all. You know, while I was here, I found myself on your major talk show, you know, being on a panel of 6 people talking about you know, hate crimes and treatment of migrants, and the entire panel was white. So you know, we need to change ourselves first, and we need to make sure that we are led by the most impacted people, not because it's politically correct, but because actually that is how you build a fighting movement that has everything on the line. Look at Standing Rock, and look at the power of that movement that is, you know, has stood up to so much state repression because they're fighting for their water, they're fighting for their culture, they're fighting for their burial sites, they're fighting for their lives.
Look, I'm sure I don't speak for the IPA, but I think I speak for many Australians in saying thank you so much for coming. You're so welcome in this country, and Avi and Toma too, and I hope that you're back very, very soon.
Thank you, David. It's been such a pleasure.